kick off influencer marketing track, as we're going to call it now, right? All right, start there. So, in 1903, decades before computers and before even typewriters, the preferred method of communication was the fountain pen. The predecessor to today's ballpoint pens, the fountain pen was elegant, it's beautiful, and it was prone to extreme messiness. Those who partook in the extended use of such instruments were clearly and literally marked. It was in that year that the Conklin Pen Company in Toledo, Ohio, decided to employ influencer marketing, though of course it wasn't called that back then. Influencer marketing is a relatively recent term, like Luca was saying. Throughout the early 20th century, brands and agencies turned to celebrities for endorsements and to serve as spokespeople for the brands. In the early 1900s, the most popular influencers were professional athletes. But Conklin knew better than to use just any old influencer. They understood that if they wanted everyday folks to be interested in their products, they needed an influencer with whom it would make sense to tie to the brand, one that everyday folks would relate to. So that is actually our first lesson and criteria when it comes to working with influencers, brand fit. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's review some preliminary concepts. As Luca was just saying, influencer marketing is when anyone's able to talk to an audience and exert some influence over that audience, which means anybody can be an influencer. Influence is not limited to celebrities with millions of social media followers. Someone with a relatively small community could be a particularly powerful voice for your brand or business given the right circumstances. So we break influencers down into a number of categories depending largely on the size of their audience. At the top, we have the mega influencer, and just like the early endorsers of the 20th century, this is largely movie stars and professional athletes. They can reach a huge audience across a wide swath of demographics, but you're going to pay dearly for that exposure. Down a tier, we've got macro influencers with their 100,000 to about 1 million or so followers, and you'll still find your share of celebrities at this level, but you'll also begin to find influencers at this category that have begun to focus on a particular area, such as travel or food, making alignment with a particular brand that much easier. Down a tier, we have the micro influencer at 1,000 to just 100,000 followers, though of course, someone with 100,000 fans could be said to have a great deal of influence, particularly if they've stayed focused on a specific niche. Now, it is at these lower levels that we start to run into some challenges with working with these influencers. Mega influencers, celebrities, they've got experienced staff who are there to work with you to build campaigns. Joe the vlogger may have never worked with a brand before, so be prepared for that. And then finally, at the lowest level, we've got that nano influencer at under 1,000 followers, somebody who may be very prominent in their community, but maybe not even very active on social media itself, yet again, could be a perfect influencer for your brand. So, I would love to just assume that you're all here because you've been bought into this idea of influencer marketing and you just want to know how to go about it the right way. But maybe some of you are thinking, no, Mike, I've seen some of the horror stories in the news. I've seen stories of influencers padding their stats or acting like divas, and I'm thinking, that's not for me. Maybe old school sales is the way to go. Except your customers today, they're not as interested in talking to salespeople or watching advertisements. But they will listen to influencers, particularly Gen Z. So if you take the time now to build an influencer marketing program that is built on relationships, that is empowering the influencers, is an exceptional way to scale content creation, reach new audiences, and establish more trust with your audience. And it's that trust that's going to determine whether they buy from you or from someone else. So if you want to be tip of mind and top of tongue, influencer marketing is an exceptionally effective means to that end. But if you read the description or if you know anything about me, you might have seen me talking about brand ambassadors and brand ambassador programs. So what's the difference between a brand ambassador and an influencer? Well, simply put, a brand ambassador is an influencer who goes beyond paid marketing campaigns. There's a relationship in place, the kind that Ken Blanchard might call a raving fan. And because there's a relationship there, and because that's the goal, we need to have a formal program in place to manage that. So now we get into the meat of what we're going to talk about today, how to actually build an influencer program. And before I go any further, I should point out that everything I'm about to share with you could be managed by a CMO or a social media manager or a partnership leader. You don't necessarily need to hire a full-time influencer marketing program manager, but you will need to spend some time up front sorting out how to do it. So, first, make sure that everybody in your organization is on the same page when it comes to goals and expectations. There is a lot that influencers can do for us, from brand awareness all the way over to sales, but they're not miracle workers. So have those KPIs and metrics and expectations documented and communicated up front. So, how do we go about finding influencers who are going to be a great fit for our brand, who are going to be potential brand ambassadors? Well, this is that first criteria I talked about, brand fit. So what is brand fit? It's the degree to which a particular influencer's voice, style, message, and content focus align with a particular brand. In other words, how alike is the influencer and the brand? It helps if you've already thought about your own brand in terms of a style guide where you've got aesthetics, logo, colors, font treatment, but also the style and the message of the brand itself. What's your culture? Having that documented and communicated in advance will make determination of brand fit easier. The second criteria is the category of influencer, i.e. mega influencer, and your available budget. Now, once you have those determinations in mind, it's time to start looking for influencers. And there's a number of ways that we're going to be able to go about doing that. The first is to think about the people who are already talking about your brand, customers, bloggers and vloggers, other internet personalities. The benefit with this particular category is great. Number one, they're already fans of your brand. You don't have to sell them on who you are or introduce them. They know who you are. They've got content already that you can amplify, and they've got a track record that you can evaluate. Now, while it's likely that members of this particular group are going to be smaller, nano, and micro influencers, that also means they're going to be more affordable. The second approach that you can take towards finding new influencers is to think about the biggest brands, the biggest influencers, the biggest names in your industry. These will be people who are speaking about and in your industry, speaking at industry events like this. The benefit here is they're already top of mind. You won't have to do a lot of research to come up with this list. You're probably already following them on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter. But that suggests a third approach, and one that you're going to take regardless, and that is research. Researching influencers will take time, but it will be extremely rewarding. It is quite likely that through your research, you will find influencers that you have never previously heard of before, but whom will make terrific spokespeople for your brands. So how do we do that? How do we actually get started with the research? Well, you can search the individual social networks themselves. You can use Google searches, but I recommend using a tool like BuzzSumo, which will surface for you influencers on various social platforms like Twitter and Facebook, people who are publishing content on websites, and you can filter those results. You can search by keyword, you can put geolocation tags, language of course, and you can see who some of the most prolific authors and influencers are in your space. Then you can drill down and see exactly what it is they're writing, where they've been publishing or talking about the industry, and you can simply determine, would it have made sense to include your brand or products in that content? If it would have, great. You found a potential influencer. Note them down, go back to the research. You can also use databases and tools like Analytica that have tens of thousands of influencers that they can surface for you. As you're tracking these influencers, you can put them in a Google Sheet or something like that, but I recommend using a CRM like HubSpot or Nimble, where you can not only note who it is that you're talking to, you can keep track of the status of the conversation, make notes. When you put an influencer into Nimble, Nimble will scour the web and find all their social profiles, their websites, their contact information, and more. If you're using BuzzSumo will give you their Twitter profile, which you can click on, and then use Nimble's Chrome extension to import them into Nimble. Tag them as an influencer, and continue your research. Now, there is a third technique that you're going to want to use, and that is to be listening to the conversations that are happening on social media, often led by influencers. And for that, you're going to need a third tool, Agorapulse. Agorapulse is a social media management solution that obviously you're going to be able to use to publish content out to all of your brand channels, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and so on, and pay attention to how those posts are going to perform. But more importantly, you're going to be able to create powerful searches around smart keywords, specific influencers, and pay attention to the conversations that are happening where it would make sense for you as a brand to be involved and potentially to reach out to those specific influencers and start to form a relationship. Now, throughout this conversation, you're going to hear me use the phrase relationships over and over again because they are so important. While it is possible to fill out a form and pay an influencer to send out a tweet, that's not effective. Truly effective influencer marketing happens when there's a relationship in place. The influencer genuinely likes and wants to promote and talk about your brand, and you genuinely like the influencer and you want to support them. But the thing is, relationships take time. I don't want to suggest that there's no shortcut to building a great relationship, because I'm about to share a bunch with you. But the problem with any relationship is that you don't know in advance how it's going to go. And in order to build rapport with each individual influencer, you've got to spend time with them one-on-one. I'm stressing this now because you might, in your research, surface a couple of really interesting influencers that you want to work with and then just kind of rush into the courtship phase rather than going back and looking for more. But as I said, we don't know in advance how these influencer relationships are going to go. They're essentially blind dates. Someone that you reach out to today is going to be super eager and anxious to work with you, and others, not so much. And I guarantee you, one of the influencers that you begin to talk to today is going to be the most amazing brand ambassador for tomorrow, but you won't know who at first. So take the time to build a list of 25 to 50 good potential influencers if you can, and begin sparking relationships with all of them. Did I mention relationships take a long time? I did? Cool. So the good news is, if you go about this framework that I'm giving you and begin working on nurturing those relationships, the odds of those becoming positive, beneficial, long-lasting relationships that are a huge benefit to you and the company increase dramatically. So how do we do it? First thing you're going to want to do is connect with each of the influencers on their preferred social platform. Here we go. Slides are slow. Simply look at wherever it is that they're active, make a determination. What's their number one, their preferred social network? Is it TikTok? Is it Instagram? Whatever it is. And connect with them there. It's important to understand that there is a difference between connect and follow. Some of the social networks, as you probably know, allow you to connect with them. Others force you to follow, and it's got to be mutually accepted if it's a connection, which means if the influencer doesn't know you, they're not going to be inclined to connect with you. It's far easier to follow them on TikTok or Instagram if that's an option. If not, maybe you can follow their public profiles. Do that first, connect with all of them. Next, begin to engage with each of those influencers one by one. And while I can't tell you exactly how to engage with them, that will depend on the post and the comments that are appropriate, let me give you some guidelines. First, you should engage with one post per influencer per day. Shares are the most meaningful form of engagement. You're essentially saying to the influencer, I trust you and your content enough to share it with my audience. Comments are where we have an opportunity to have discussion and develop similarities in thought. This is where we build rapport. Likes and similar reactions are nice for staying top of mind, but they're not very meaningful. You may like, comment on, and share an individual's post, but be wary of doing that too often or of liking every single thing that they publish. Some influencers might see you as a raving fan. Others might just think you're raving. So let's not do that. And instead, spend 30 to 60 minutes per day, on average, working through our entire list of targeted influencers and engaging where it makes sense to do so. It is through this engagement that we are, in fact, building rapport, but we're also learning about and determining the third criteria for working with influencers, audience engagement. Because while it's possible for influencers to purchase followers. It's also possible for followers to have lost interest in a particular influencer. We want to make sure that their current audience is active and engaged. So we are personally engaging and we are personally observing, and we are paying attention to things like, are we the only one commenting? Or is there a nice variety of people who are commenting on each and every post? Is the influencer responding to those comments? Or are they ignoring us and everybody else? What's the tone and the style of their comments? Here's a question. If the influencer was responding to a comment as you or your brand, how comfortable would you be? If you pay attention, you can determine their perspectives when it comes to business and life and other important aspects that are really critical to both you and your target audience. You'll come to understand their worldview, and that will help you understand them and relate to them better. After you've engaged with them and they've responded positively for a while, you've done that for a while, now comes the next step in your relationship with the influencer, collaboration. At Agorapulse, where I'm the head of strategic partnerships, it's my job to work with social media influencers, and I gift them free access to our social media tool. I can see if they're using it, I can see if they talk about us online, and if they do, I can amplify their content. I can send them swag and corporate gifts. I can invite them to live events. I can invite them to participate in webinars and roundups and other kinds of marketing activities. In fact, every single quarter, I run a massive virtual summit with thousands of attendees that drives hundreds of new leads and registrants for Agorapulse, and I have no shortage of amazing experts to tap for those events. If possible and appropriate, those are terrific first steps that you can take with any influencer because they're win-win situations and of, frankly, little to no cost to you as the brand. The next step will be a paid campaign of some kind, and what that looks like will vary obviously from brand to brand, from campaign to campaign, but while you might be tempted, I don't know, to fork out a huge sum of cash and pay a mega influencer to issue a tweet, we said, that's probably not going to be effective. So let's focus on some more longer lasting activities, like asking an influencer to write a blog post, leave a review, participate in a Facebook Live interview. How about mention your brand or products in their newsletter to their audience or their Instagram broadcast channel? Do something along those lines, and just make sure that if you can, it adheres to as many of these benefits and aspects as possible. It should be long-lasting enough to introduce your brand or products to their audience, but short enough to limit risk and initial investment. It's got to educate their audience on who you are and what it is that you do, but it's also got to entertain your audience to keep them engaged. And it should result in assets which can be reused and repurposed over time. Suppose you want to work with a micro-influencer and introduce your brand or products to their audience. You would come up first with a topic of real interest to that influencer and their target audience, one that's relevant to your brand. Come up with some articles, yours or other people's, that they can share. Determine some key hashtags, mention your brand, and maybe culminate the entire campaign with a live video discussion of that topic, at the end of which you will have driven traffic back to your web properties. You will have increased your social media following. And you will have created a piece of video content which can be reused and repurposed in any number of ways. Now, when it comes to compensation, influencers and brands have a lot of options, because while a mega influencer is going to require a contract and a fat payout, many other influencers are going to be decidedly more affordable, starting with free. I mean, retail brands are often able to work with nano and micro influencers simply by offering a discount on their products. The key is to balance practicality with generosity. Make sure that what you're asking for fits what it is that you're offering in exchange. It's also important at this point to begin having regular conversations and meetings to review the success of your program on a monthly or quarterly basis. Don't just assume that it's working. And it's helpful to have these conversations with the influencers themselves. How else can you be of support and information to them and help them be a more vocal advocate for your brand? Because remember, this is about building relationships. And with those relationships come opportunities for the influencer to talk about your brand in organic, authentic, community, dark social kinds of places and ways when they're speaking at industry events. I mentioned Nimble earlier. I'm not a paid endorser of Nimble. I have a relationship with John, the founder of Nimble, and so I'm happy to talk about his brand when it makes sense to do so. But that, of course, begs the question, how do we measure the success of our programs. So that's the last topic we're going to cover real quick, success. I mentioned at the outset the Conklin Pen Company. Who do you think they would have gone with in 1903? Someone who espouses all the benefits and criteria we've talked about above? None other than Mark Twain. Twain was the author of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Life on the Mississippi, and A Connecticut Yank in King Arthur's Court. He was also known throughout the country as someone who penned his thoughts regularly. Clearly, Twain could easily be seen using and enjoying something like a fountain pen. And so he was paid to endorse the Conklin Crescent pen. And he was quoted as saying, "I prefer it to 10 other fountain pens because it carries its filler in its own stomach, and I cannot mislay it, even by art or intention. Also, I prefer it because it is a profanity saver. It cannot roll off the desk." His endorsements and quote led to countless more sales and referrals, and it also resulted in assets that they were able to reuse for over a century. To this day, you can buy a Conklin fountain pen with Twain's signature endorsement. So clearly that was a success for Conklin, no matter the cost. But what about you? How do you measure success? Well, due to the density of icebergs, it's not uncommon for large slabs of ice to just float through the ocean with nothing but the tip visible above the water, while the rest of the iceberg remains huge below. Measuring influencer marketing is exactly the same. There are things we can measure: clicks, reach, leads, sales. What we cannot measure is how often somebody decides to purchase as a result of hearing about our brand or product from an influencer days, maybe weeks later. We also can't measure how their perceptions change, hopefully positively, as a result of the information from and the association with that influencer. Simply put, this is brand awareness, and it cannot simply be measured. But when influencer marketing is executed well, it will have a benefit on your most important metric of it all, your bottom line. Thank you. We have a few minutes for questions. I'm also at the Agorapulse booth all afternoon if we have more questions about influencer marketing, building a program, or Agorapulse itself. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you so much. You were talking about minimizing the risk when working with influencers. So when it comes to, for example, the goal being generating leads and sales, we have to work with influencers on a long-term basis so that it clicks with the customer and that he makes the decision to actually go ahead and buy. When it comes to this, how do we minimize the risk? Like, how do we know this is the right person to work with for, let's say, 6 months or even a year? Should we start with a 1 or 2 post campaign first and then see the results and then move into a long-term relationship? Or how do we make sure this is the right person?
It's a great question. I would say don't start with 1 or 2 posts because, that's probably not going to be very effective. We're probably just going to be disappointed, and then we're not going to want to work with them long term. Instead, it's going to take some time to research. We would look at, for instance, have they worked with other brands before? Similarly, can they share any details or case studies or metrics over how those past campaigns performed? How similar are they to other influencers that we've worked with? Can we help guide them? Can we give them, for instance, ideas on the kinds of content that we know have performed well in the past? How closely can we look at their target audience? Is it just their social media followers? Do they have an email subscriber list? What data can we look at to really help understand how it's going to be like to work with them? The other thing you might consider doing is some of those co-marketing and collaboration campaigns where maybe you're not paying them to do something, maybe you're involving them in a webinar, in a virtual event, in a live event if you're in their location, something along those lines. And you can get a sense of the kind of work that they can do, how they like to work. I'll be honest, some influencers look great on paper and they've got these wonderful online personalities, but then you actually go to work with them and it's not quite the same story. And that's, again, why the relationship's important. I want to have relationships with people that I enjoy working with, that I enjoy talking to. And if it becomes a challenge from the influencer's perspective to me, they're not going to work with me. And if it becomes a challenge for me to work with the influencer, I'm not going to work with them. So that's the one thing you'll do. The other thing you're going to want to do is make sure that when you get to the point where you're creating a campaign and you are trying to measure it, that you have thought through everything that you're asking them to do and how it's going to be possible to measure all of that. I'll give you an example. You're often going to be giving influencers a link to share because that's easy. We can track that link. Hopefully we're giving them a trackable link or a dedicated landing page, something like that, where we can see and associate all the clicks, all the traffic to that influencer. One of the things that I did at Agorapulse, because I'm working with influencers who are often speaking on stages, just like I am today, and they're not going to share an affiliate link from a stage, particularly if it's a long, ugly link, right? With UTM parameters, that's never gonna happen. So I used a tracking software called First Promoter, which allows me to create a landing page on agorapulse.com, and I can assign every single trafficked click through to that landing page to a specific influencer, regardless of where the traffic came from. So the influencer doesn't have to share a link. They just have to say on stage, hey, if you want a couple free months of Agorapulse, go to agorapulse.com/Alton. That's easy, right? I could say that from the stage. I could say it in a conversation. I can remember it, and I can give it to somebody in a Facebook community comment, wherever the case might be. And then as the organization, I can track everything that happens there. Yeah, great question. Yes, ma'am. Oh, hi. Hi, Danielle. Thank you.
Check, check.
There you go.
Cool. Hi, Danielle here. Thank you so much for this presentation. My question for you, I am a linked influencer. And that's a real thing. I am a LinkedIn top voice, and I create a lot of content with them, mostly about the future of work and Gen Z. My question is, how are you thinking about LinkedIn as a creator platform? Because I think they are doing a lot to attract more creators to the platform. They have Mr. Beast on there now. They have a bunch of big names on there, and they're also trying to amplify younger and more diverse voices as well. So I'm curious, what your approach is and how brands maybe are thinking about LinkedIn as an influencer marketing channel, specifically around B2B.
Yeah, first of all, congratulations on being a LinkedIn top voice. That's amazing. That's awesome. I love LinkedIn. I am B2B. So obviously, if you're B2C, LinkedIn's probably not going to be your most successful channel. Not that it's a bad channel. Like you said, they're doing a lot to grow it, but it's still not what people go there to learn about fashion trends and food and that sort of thing. But from B2B, I love LinkedIn. I love the moves that they're making, both to the functionality of the platform itself, to the actual culture that's on LinkedIn. There's a lot that goes on that people think from a microcosm and a norm perspective might be driven by the users, but a lot of it's actually driven by the platform because they take the time to identify top voices and amplify those voices and have those kinds of activities. So as an example, on LinkedIn today, you can create a newsletter and it is extremely effective. LinkedIn bends over backwards to promote your newsletter, to promote your content, to drive subscribers to that content. You could start a newsletter today, and within a week or two have 1,000, 1,500 subscribers. I can't do that off platform using MailChimp or something like that without putting a lot of extra effort in it myself. That is extremely effective for influencers, and that makes it a great way for businesses to work with influencers on LinkedIn. If you identify someone who's building an audience on LinkedIn, they're showing up every single day, they're creating content, they're reaching out to their audience, they're helping their audience, they're building community. Those are fantastic opportunities for businesses. So I love LinkedIn. Thank you. Any other questions? I got to keep moving forward because the lights are like right here and I can't see anybody if I don't move this far forward. Anything else? Cool. Well, like I said, I'm here all afternoon. I know you guys have some other tracks here, so keep learning about influencer marketing. Stop by the Agorapulse booth later and say hi. Thank you.